congestion. And in fact, a lot of people who end up moving into Frederick County, one of the reasons they're doing it is to get away from congestion, even the congestion that exists further into Montgomery County. So, I think we have to have some parallel visions of, are there economic incentives? Do we have a vision of the kind of corporations or businesses? I mean, Montgomery County had the vision of being a biotech corridor, right? And when they did planning around those areas where they were going to, place their quote unquote science city, when they were developing the farm at Falls Grove, they envisioned the residential, but they envisioned the kinds of businesses they were going to try to draw to that area. So I think there's some value in trying to understand what possible economic development strategies might be applied to this region.
Thank you, Faith. You brought up something that I was going to speak to, but you've already gotten into it, and that is this whole idea of how do we support our life science community? Is this the location where we want to go ahead and say you should build your life science company, or for that matter, technology-based company? And what are we doing to create that environment for them, for companies to say this is a good place to set up a technology company, because tech company needs collaboration. They need highly trained workforce. They need the momentum that gives them the confidence that if they put a business there, that the talent will come.
Well, and to that end, not to be too topical, but I think we have to look at how is COVID going to impact the workforce. We already know that there are numerous businesses who, some of the big employers like insurance companies, who are telling their workforces plan on never coming back. And so if we're designing areas where there's a high density of living, and we're saying, well, we want you to be close to your jobs, but their jobs are in the living room. I do think we have to think about what will the next 5 or 10 years tell us about the long-lasting impact of this pandemic.
So I will just put in my own opinion and my own take on the COVID situation. Our company is very heavily involved in making test kits, as well as working with pharmaceutical company to develop vaccines and everything. And just knowing my background of other past viruses that we've had, other diseases and everything, that it may take time, it may take years to go ahead and come up with an effective therapy, but we've been able to go ahead and provide those tools. And in respect to this particular location, I am definitely looking out 10 years, 15 years out, rather than the short term. I will not deny that COVID is having a huge impact on the economy, but I believe that we'll find a way to go ahead and manage this particular that we will be able to contain it to the degree that we can start to grow again. When we start to grow, that's an open question for anybody else to answer.
One thing to consider in terms of commuting and the need to be, or the desire to be close to a corridor or kind of a transportation artery, is that of the 8.5 to 9 trips generated by a typical household in Frederick County, like 7 of them have nothing to do with commuting to work. And when you think of it in those terms, that most of the trips we're making are going to the soccer field, or going to the grocery store, or going to get drunk in downtown Frederick, whatever it might be. Of course, not driving on the way home. By trip, I meant Uber. Did I say that? Uber, yeah, that's it. Whatever it is, those other trips make up the lion's share of our time out on the roadway. So I think there's at least a discussion point to be had that even in a world where we were somehow all working at home forever and ever and ever, there's still going to be a need to move around, because our kids are still going to go to school. We're still going to go to the store. I'm still going downtown to eat. So there's a lot of other movements, and facilitating the movements between the things that make them more convenient. So I can't, walk to work. Probably in the future, not a lot of other people will be able to walk to work, much like what we have now. But if I can combine trips, if I have to take a car or an Uber or ride my bike or whatever, if I can go someplace and then I can make a couple of stops and not have to keep getting back in my vehicle to go to the next one, even that helps. And it's not just like, for global climate change or whatever. I mean, get the whole existential stuff off the table for a second. I'd like to save time. I would very much like to multitask by walking my 3 miles a day as part of my running my errands or whatever. I'd love to be able to kind of double up on some of those activities so that I'm not spending so much time in a vehicle or so much time taking care of the things that just allow me to stay alive. So there's some arguments for density, or at least better integrated neighborhoods and physical environments that have nothing to do with the commuting patterns.
I would add on to that too. I think there's a preconception about the notion of density and walkability, that you can only achieve that type of environment in a very high density, mixed use urban area. And the connection between density and mixed use is actually not as linear as that. I think the connection between density and physical character isn't as linear. A small town environment has a mix of uses that are accessible to residences that is extremely low density, and it exists in a physical character that can potentially create a pleasant walkable environment that's transit accessible. So I wouldn't dismiss the notion of improving the physical character of this area on the basis that the assumption that a certain degree of density is not viable. I don't think there's as much of a connection between density and physical character as is often assumed.
I think Brunswick Crossing makes your point, John, pretty effectively. The new massive development out in Brunswick, but with a little bit of forethought and a good plan review process, that community with even in the single family sections is highly walkable, very pedestrian friendly, and includes the connections that are necessary down to the core downtown and the MARC station. So I agree with you 100%.
I need to also apologize. I was having trouble getting the live streaming up and running. So if anybody is sort of listening through public input, I hope that it's up and running now, and I apologize for the problem there. I'm kind of curious, Michael McLean, you're with the hospital, and there's a lot of discussion and research out there about the connection between the type of physical place that people live in and their rates of obesity and general health outcomes. More places that facilitate walking as a form of transportation typically, or have been shown that there's a correlation between positive health outcomes. And I was just curious about your impressions of that as someone in the medical field. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I was just curious.
No, that's all right, John. So whether it's through the initiatives like 5210 that we've started with the county, trying to get people up, trying to get people moving, trying to get them eating healthier, incorporating it into their entire lifestyle. As we look towards the State Farm campus, one of the things that we're starting to incorporate is how do we make that environment very walkable so that we continue to get people moving. You're spot on. The more people move, the better in shape they're going to be. So it's something that I was very happy to see about the sort of walkability of the options that you gave. Even when you were looking at the neighborhoods, it looked like there were sidewalks. It looked like I live over in Linganore, and there are no sidewalks in Linganore for the most part. And it makes, I think it invites people to be more active versus when they have to make a choice to walk on a road or a trail they're uncomfortable with. So I think having some of that incorporated into this this plan makes a lot of sense. And walkability to the job, walkability to medical offices, walkability to school is something that should be looked at when we're examining all aspects of this.
Thanks. So, I know we're all kind of struggling to figure out where this is all going, as am I. It's the beginning of this process, and I think that's how it's going to be at the beginning. Putting out these kind of things that people react to will help us build up a better approach over time. And I just want to say thanks for your patience as we do this. We're learning a lot as we do it. We don't know everything up front, and that's sort of the whole point. We need to try to figure it out as we go to some degree. So I just wanted to make that statement. Yep.
I think a big piece that would be helpful in defining the areas is we kind of need a vision for what's the green infrastructure and what are the connections and what is the hydrology that we'd like to achieve against this sort of background of a lot of gray infrastructure. Because that can then define, well, what kind of densities and what kind of forms are we putting next to that and how are they connected?
Yeah, I think, being able to react to actual, proposals would help us along as well. But yeah, having that kind of information, like what could a potential green infrastructure be, which requires some design, work to be able to do that, would help us kind of I think a lot of us are more comfortable reacting to things that are proposed as opposed to proposing things that people would react to, So maybe something like that would be a good way to move forward.
I liked your point that you brought up, Jack, about the idea of bringing up some environmental practices within this area. I know that our company at one point actually looked at doing solar panels to go ahead and make ourselves become more carbon neutral. And I do know that for a lot of these businesses, they're definitely going in that particular route. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity here, perhaps, maybe not, offer an incentive to go ahead and allow companies that do situate themselves within this area or other parts of Frederick County to encourage them to take on environmental practices that benefit not only them, but for their customers and the population at large.
That sounds like something to me that's enticing, but down at more at the regulatory level than up here at the sort of visioning planning. But I do think that you can think about things as we did like with the East Frederick Rising about, having your own microgrid in an area so that you're not dependent on, the other systems, that sort of out there kinds of things, I'm going to have to pop here shortly, so that might probably be my last statement.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you for tolerating me.
Yeah, I think along that environmental front, I think that if we're looking at green space use and park use or no mow areas or whatever the vision might be for those spaces, I would hope too that we would think about areas near, more dense housing where you could have community gardens, where you could, have some experiences that, not just increasing density, but not allowing for these other kinds of activities that's, especially here in Frederick with that history of agriculture or whatever, we should really make sure that we're allowing for some of these kinds of smaller activities for residents to still, have that experience close to their homes.
Yeah, and I think now's the opportunity to think about that systematically and area-wide, which is an approach that will make it cheaper in the long run for the development to occur, as opposed to, every individual property needing to think about those issues independently. There are quite a number of new sort of ecological subdivisions happening where, granted they're completely new developments out in rural landscapes that are being urbanized. But as infrastructure is being built, these systems are being installed simultaneously. So, like for example, having a community-wide geothermal network that supplies every house in the neighborhood and that's centrally controlled. And there may be potential. Like one of the things we could think about and potentially assess is what is the potential for something like that in this plan. Can we actually install for example, a community-wide geothermal network in the South Florida corridors?
Right. Or if you were building a rec center or something to service this area, that would be the time to put in a geothermal heat pump perhaps and demonstrate for the county, the possibilities of that system.
I'll just go ahead and put it in perspective. And if you ever get a candidate that applies for a job at our Thermo Fisher site, a lot of the young professionals that come are definitely looking for that. They're looking for an environment where they feel like the company is doing their bit to help the environment, and it becomes an attraction point. If they know that we offer a gym for them to work out or offer things that really allow them to help that green, healthy lifestyle, they're more inclined to want to go ahead and join the company because we are carrying a vision that they believe in, meet their particular own value system.
Yep.
So if there's like a three-pronged, like a triangle of issues to consider in this area, I think one of them would be multimodal accessibility, like we discussed. Another central point of the triangle would be these kind of environmental systems and how they can become more sustainable and made more sustainable over time. And then the third point would be housing affordability, and how do we actually introduce housing in this area and use strategies that support affordability. So, I mean, I'm hoping we're going to be able to, as this group moves forward, kind of focus on those 3 points of the triangle and make some interesting headway as we think about possible strategies.
And I would just make sure that we include our purposeful about interconnectivity between those 3 units. I think connectivity is definitely a critical point that we need to address.
I also think that if you're going to increase the density, clearly you're going to be increasing the hardscape in the area and the potential for kind of increasing temperatures, because getting more of a heat island effect, I mean, that's not just an urban concern, when you're in these areas. So there are technologies, even in terms of road building, but roofing and green roofs and things like that, that would be good to see incentivized, for this area, because, if we do take away some of the green space, what are we doing to combat, these other effects that could happen? That certainly could impact health as well.
I would say, though, that in areas that are developed, there's very little impervious surface within those areas. I mean, there are certain, like floodplain areas are certainly pervious, but in terms of hardscape, there's a significant amount of hardscape in this area. And that's maybe one area of potential, like you're saying, is that how much can we mitigate the impact of that through redevelopment?
Yeah, because I've done the test myself. I've ridden through Urbana and whatever, and then I've gone further north, and you could get a 2 degree difference. Same day, same things, just riding from 2 different parts of this county as to how much, how developed the one region is compared to the other.
Okay, well, so what do you guys think so far relative to how you'd like to see this group proceed? Would you like to take a similar stance where we all kind of can participate in exercises that, and then kind of get response from them? Would you like to have presentations from specialists relative to certain topics? My one concern is that we don't get too far afield. I want us to be able to focus on the specific area and think about specifics relative to this planning area, and maybe not focus as much on these kind of broader topics, but more how those broad topics apply to this area. So do y'all have any thoughts about how you guys want to proceed? You don't have to answer now either. We can.
I was looking at data and GIS. I mean, I'd like to look at square footage and density and compare the residential density in the different areas, so we get sort of a mapping overview of what exists now, and then maybe we can talk about what sort of form do we envision, how do we envision that looking in the future.
So there's a lot of information in the background report. If there's something else specifically that you'd like us to provide, we can certainly do that.
John, is there a system of goals and sub-goals on this piece that have been articulated? I mean, I've looked in the report, but I mean, do we have that? Because if we don't, for me, I don't know. I can't do any planning endeavor without some set of objectives. I could just.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fruitful approach. Something that we definitely are going to work into, and can certainly, kick off now. With this first meeting, I really wanted to try to get people to think about the physical character of the environment. I think that's one thing about this plan in particular that's very different than other plans we've done in the county in the past. So, thinking about it in terms of urban design and, urban, not so much, downtown Manhattan, but like in the sense that it's the design of the public realm, I guess. So, but that still requires goals and objectives, and we need to be able to articulate what outcome we want, and that's what the goals are. So, yes, definitely, we need to do that.
Yeah, because here's the thing: if we start out with something soon, we can always change them or modify them as we go through the process. They're not, they don't have to be etched in stone, but at least you give some barn doors around what we're doing. Because for me, it's all kind of a little amorphous, and I need some working parameters that I think would help me.
Yeah, and it's kind of for these first few meetings, or maybe even just this meeting, we'll see, is for it to be amorphous. It's kind of like the idea is brainstorming, the idea is keeping it as open as possible. And as we move forward, it's going to get more specific, and our task is going to get much more structured. But so I understand if some people are not comfortable like in that kind of context where things are a bit loosey goosey, but that's not how it's going to stay. We're going to have much more specific things to think about, and creating goals and objectives is one of those things, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
So I would like to add a couple things and a couple observations. Like it's been said earlier, I think by Dennis especially, the county is going to grow. There's no question of that. We're going to have 100,000 people in whatever time frame it was that he stated. So the issue becomes, where do we put those people? There's been developments planned out in farm fields in Monrovia area and that area. So do we want them out there, or do we want them in downtown Frederick, in the heart of Frederick, or do we want them in a place like South Corridors that already has infrastructure in place? So obviously for me, I since the infrastructure is there, and a lot of it's already been paved over with asphalt, I don't think we can do much more environmental harm than's already been done. So I, it's an overarching goal. I think that we're trying to figure out what potential this whole area has for both businesses, existing businesses, envisioned businesses that we don't even know about yet, and then how do we integrate housing along with all that to give people places to live where they can be close to these businesses, whatever they happen to be. So it's a challenge, and I struggle going through the exercise, when I'm looking at some of the warehouses and some of the existing structures, and to try to figure out, how does this change and what transition do we go through in all these places. So it is a struggle, but I have this vague notion in mind how it might look, but I'm not an artist, and I don't know that I can draw that out. But earlier you said, John, that sometimes it's easier to react to proposals. I was wondering if you or any of the other planners have the capability to do a conceptual plan of, say, one area. I know when we're doing affordable housing projects, the architects can pretty quickly come up with a conceptual design so they can show it to people to see what we're doing. I don't know if anyone here has that ability to, say, take one area like the FSK Mall, for example, and just totally redo it and put out, a concept of how that might work in that one particular area. And that would give us something kind of to react to and comment on.
We do have that. We do have the capability, and we have several conceptual plans that we've worked on over the past couple decades, decade and some. So that might actually be a really good approach to sort of throw something out there, an actual design for the area that incorporates, physical character, density, land use, and get you guys to look at it, present it to you guys, and get you guys to critique it specifically. I mean, frankly, I think that could be very fruitful. And maybe we do like a two-pronged approach here. We think about it in that sense, like where you guys are almost sort of like the design studio jury, and we're kind of presenting concepts to you guys, and you guys are reacting to it. And also from the goals and objectives perspective. The one thing about the goals and objectives that concerns me is it definitely needs to be very kind of specific and catered to this area. We're beyond the point now. We're kind of setting these broader, points on the horizon. Right now, we're looking at what we want to get done in this area. So not to suggest that goals and objectives are not a piece of that, but just as long as we do that in thinking about sort of the specifics of the area. But I think that's a great idea. Maybe we take that kind of two-pronged approach.
If we could find some real life examples of how this has successfully been applied in terms of building more affordable housing, and usually I think it has to be for the drillers, because it has to be contrasted against higher value property so that you can then afford to build the lower cost units. But seeing some actual examples might be helpful.
Yeah, and there's actually a book that came out recently called Retrofitting Suburbia, and that was sort of more of a broader approach, but they've now released a new book, which is a complete book of case studies that have addressed this issue of retrofitting suburbia, which is kind of what we're doing here. And I can send a link to the group for that particular book, and maybe try to find a few examples out of that we can talk about for the next meeting. It's a great idea. So two-pronged approach, more triangles. I love it. Triangles everywhere. It's the triangles, baby. So yeah, design critique, case studies, and goals and objectives. Those seem like three things, and a vision. In addition to the goals and objectives, we can start thinking about a vision as well. Like maybe catered to specific areas for the entire area. But I think those three things might help us structure the rest of this process. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah. John, on the design critique, are you thinking not that you have a lot of small areas within the larger area, but several of the small areas would have their own concept? So, 1, 2, and 3 would have this concept, 4, 5, and 6. Is that what you're thinking?
Potentially. Like what we've done in the past, it's mainly been for the South Frederick Triangle area, which is the area on the east side of 270. But and if there's anybody in this group that wants to partake and create a conceptual design that we can then critique, have at it. But I think it could be either one. Like what we've done has broken the area down into different segments, into these districts. but it also looks at the entire area. So it has kind of two scales. One that looks at the major infrastructure and the broader approach, and the other that looks at the physical configuration of these smaller districts. So, yeah.
You know, the other thing that might be useful is in looking at potential case studies, is to find areas perhaps similar to Frederick, but where there have been conversion of, let's say, malls or warehouse areas. And sometimes it's good to look at examples that are positive and negative so that we know what we don't want to have happen, right? This is the stuff we don't like, and this is the stuff, you know, we're really excited about as a potential for this area. So I would encourage us to look at both sides of that equation as we look at case studies. But that may be a one area to kind of benchmark is conversion of a mall area, conversion of a big box area, you know, where there's some other case studies from other areas, not even necessarily Maryland, you know, but similar states and areas that have either had successes or potential failures.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, John, just another thought. Rick had brought this up too about, you know, the light industrial group and, you know, what is it? How do we reflect that? How do we show that? You know, Dennis had mentioned the fact that the county is going to grow by 100,000 people. Simply to keep, you know, our taxes down, the services in place and so forth. Where does the commercial employment need to grow to maintain proportionately that balance between residential growth and employment? I think that would be helpful too, if we could just understand, you know, based on case studies, what makes the most sense, so that we're not focused more on residential or more on commercial, that we find, you know, whatever that balance is.
Yeah, that's a great point. And any information you can provide for that would be, you know, very welcome. Okay. Well, maybe we are ready to kind of wrap up this meeting, unless anyone has something else they'd like to add. And we might go to public comment here. So it looks like we do have a caller on the line. So caller, if you can hear us, dial *3 to be put into a queue if you'd like to make a comment. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. In the meantime, I just wanted to confirm with everybody, you know, based on our doodle poll, we agreed to try to meet every 2 weeks on Mondays from 1 to 3. So that means our next meeting is scheduled for November 2nd, Monday at 1 o'clock. Same time, same place.
Excellent. I do just have one comment, and I obviously have a vested interest in. I'd be curious as to go ahead and try to figure out how we can make this Southern Corridor be like a life science corridor, or how we want to plug that particular vision into the overall vision of this area.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of the tip of the long corridor of, you know, this bioscience technology I-270 corridor. So it's certainly clearly not far afield to think about that strategy.
John, not to add to your list, but if you could send out the appointment.
Yes.
You know, just send out the series. I think that'd be great.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not seeing anybody enter the queue here. So if we're missing your comment, I do apologize. You can certainly give me a call or email me, and I can convey the message, or you can you know, provide comment at our next meeting on the 2nd. But other than that, I thank you for your forbearance with this process so far, and we're still figuring it out. And I feel like we have a good more clarity about how to move forward in a productive way, and I appreciate that. And I've learned a lot so far, and I really appreciate the discussion. So without anything further, I guess we'll see you guys on the 2nd.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Actually, Dennis and Kim, if you're still on, do you think you could hang on for a bit? Hey, Rick. You can stay if you want. Okay.
We have a still in here, number 8. Is that what it is?
So I just got an email from Eric saying that he tried to make a comment. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Nothing came in with public input.
He was not getting, I think he was not in on the video stream, but he was connected by phone. So
The video stream was my fault. I forgot to hit a button. So then I figured out I needed to hit that button later on. In fact, let me end the video stream now because we're still streaming.